All right, so we are now at step 5. The bulk of step 5 is going to be spent actually completing the application. And at the end of the application, a eligibility letter is immediately generated, and you will collect certain data pieces from that letter and insert them into the tracking sheet, step 5, which you can see right there. There are also lots of resources on the resource page, and you can see those on the right-hand corner, just things to help you do the application. So at this point, if you've been following the steps laid out on the tracking sheet and in the resource page, you technically have all the major information you need to complete the application, things such as the household and the income. But what would happen if you'd skipped the steps and just gone right into the application? I think very frequently a consumer will sit down with you and say, I've already done the whole thing. I had a plan last year. I just need to sign up again. And it's tempting to just skip our procedures and go immediately into the application, right? Especially if they have their login information, because the information's already in there. And if he's saying, like, I'm good to go, all I need to do is re-up, take his word on that, right? Wrong. So here are all the things that in theory could have taken place in the past year that Ernest may not mention to you. He could have gotten married, he could have gotten a job, another job, his spouse and himself might have had children, there could have been coverage offered, and if you go right into the application and make the assumption that nothing's changed, and I promise you this will only happen when you do that, it could turn out that you've wasted a lot of your own time and a lot of the consumer's time. Because, for example, if he's gotten married to someone with an offer of coverage and you haven't gone through step 2 with him, he may not be eligible for subsidies again. And he may enter into this appointment with the idea that everything's going to stay the same, and it's up to us to let him know that may not be the case. So recommended is for you to go through those steps quickly. Some consumers want to protest that they've already done the consent form, and that's probably true. They may have done it in a previous year, but we need it every single year. Double check in. Is there an offer of coverage? Anybody in the household currently offered coverage through their job? Are you still working at the same place? Still self-employed? If everything's the same, we're good to just check off that there's no offer. Have there been any changes to your tax household? You're still single, just capturing all the information as needed in step 3 before you get into the application. And you can always ask them, are you expecting an income similar to what's in the application from last year? Let's quickly re-estimate that, but you can also go ahead into the application and see what was in there for 2017 if the consumer feels pretty certain the income will be exactly the same. But the idea here is a quick check-in is definitely better than no check-in. A quick review of those steps is definitely going to serve you better than going directly into the application without considering those first 4 steps at all. Assuming you've done that, you are now ready to visit the healthcare.gov website, and this is what that looks like. So the first question is going to be whether or not the consumer already has an account. If they do, we want to get into that account, but if they don't, we'll create a new one. Of course, the first question is if they have an account, do they know their login information? And unfortunately, very often they do not. So a couple of rules in terms of breaking into existent accounts. Please do not send the consumer away to get their login information. Whether they have it at home or whether they can easily find it is sort of debatable, but while they are here with us, we can go ahead and help them break into that account. There's also a link on the healthcare.gov page that says forgot username password link. I would recommend avoiding this because in order to reset that password in that way, you would need to be able to correctly answer the security questions. And what I will advise you of based on my experience is that if a consumer doesn't know their username and password, they very rarely know their security questions. This is a resource on the resource page that explains how a consumer can get the healthcare.gov website to manually reset their password, to send them a temporary password that we can use to create a new password and break into the account. So in certain cases, we will assign them this while they're waiting. But if ever a consumer gets to you and they've not been able to complete this step, please use this resource to help them break into that account. And of course, grab a manager or a volunteer leadership member if you need any assistance with this. Assuming the consumer does not have an account, you'll create one. And as the CMS training outlines, to create an account, you'll need their first name, last name, an email address, a password, and the answers to 3 security questions. Now, please do enter a name on the account as it appears on an official document. The consumer may have a nickname. Please do not use that nickname. Use an official name. Make sure the consumer can access the email you're using for their username right now in front of you if you have any doubts, because they will immediately need to open it to verify the creation of this account. If they do not have an email address or cannot access their email address, you can use one of our pre-generated ICT email addresses for the consumer. Those will be made available for you. A best practice is to allow the consumer to create the password. They're going to need it to be at least 8 to 20 characters. It will need at least one uppercase, one lowercase letter, and at least one number. If they have a good sense of what they want their password to be, it's a good idea to let them create it because there's more of a chance they'll remember it that way. The 3 security questions, unfortunately, are not very good. I highly recommend utilizing questions and answers for things that won't change. They have a couple of really, really bad questions, such as what is a significant date in your life? This is a bad question because no one will remember what the event was that they used, right? It could be anything. But the other reason this is a bad question is they could be using a number. They could be spelling out February, just writing Feb. Did they use dashes or slashes? The odds that the consumer is going to remember this and get this right are very, very low. So questions with information that doesn't change, like the oldest niece or a favorite childhood friend or the city where mom was born, those can be safe bets, or like the favorite pet. If the consumer has a quick response to any of these, that's the question to pick. Do not spend a lot of time on this. It should not be where you're exerting energy, especially since we're going to enter that information for consumers on this form. So this enables you to write the username, the password, and the answers to the security questions. So this should not be where you're spending tons and tons of energy. The consumer will pretty immediately receive an email from notices@healthcare.gov with a link in it to verify the email address. They should click that link. They can do it from their phone. They can do it on the desktop, and they will receive this email that lets them know the account is ready. And this is when you on the computer want to go ahead and log into the account using the values that you just set up, that username, the email address, and the password. Some general application tips. So keep in mind, you already have the big picture information. You've already discussed income. You've already discussed family household. So stick with the things you've already discussed. It's a good idea to check in as you enter, but for the most part, keep the entry the same as what you and the consumer have discussed. Don't recalculate anything when you're in the application. Another tip, if you have a question about an application question, please ask someone. Don't guess or assume. As you get accustomed to the application, we advise summarizing the information rather than reading verbatim. And we do have some documents that can help explain what certain questions mean. We advise as well passing the keyboard to the consumer as opposed to switching seats with them in the interests of being expeditious. The consumer needs to sign the application twice, but you should be the person doing everything else, navigating the application and essentially doing all entry except for that sign. When you log into the account, you will see a green button, a welcome screen that advises you to start a new application or update an existing one. So this is if you were starting from scratch. A good mnemonic device for this application is that green, for the most part, is your friend. So in a new account, you would need to verify the consumer's identity. If this is an existing account, this has probably already been done. But to verify the person's identity, you need to enter all the following information. If they have a social, please definitely enter it. And of course, if they don't, you should be able to skip that step. This should pull open a 3 to 5 question verification quiz. This is from the website Experian, so it'll be based on the consumer's credit history, and the questions tend to be pretty straightforward. Please read those questions or summarize those questions for the consumer and have the consumer answer. Try not to tell them, hey, your county, it should be Travis, right? As much as possible, don't lead them to the answers. They should know it's their information, and it's relatively straightforward. There will be questions that have a none of the above option. In fact, every question should have that option, which consumers tend to be turned off by. But for example, with this question, if the consumer has never lived in Odessa, they will never had a phone number with the area code 432. None of the above will be the answer. And you can remind the consumer that none of the above is a perfectly acceptable answer, particularly if the question couldn't apply, that they're trying to catch someone who might be posing as the consumer. So it tends to be pretty easy to pass that verification, and once you do, you will get this screen, which states in essence that you must agree to have the marketplace check your information against federal sources. This is a federal application, and the consumer's information will be checked based on that. So they do have to agree to go forward. So at the very beginning of the application, you'll need to decide if you are single or married. Again, remember that if we're saying the consumer is head of household, a victim of domestic violence or abandonment, we will select single, even though they may technically be married. And that's because the IRS defines them as single in those situations, not married. You will identify how many tax dependents the consumer has and whether or not you are requesting insurance for those dependents. Next, you're going to indicate how much income the consumer expects this year, and you'll notice there's a less than 400% of the FPL level and a more than 400% of the FPL level option. And then it will ask if you want to answer additional questions to see if the consumer will qualify for help paying for coverage. Now again, this is going to be the case for 99% of our consumers. If they are trying to get an exemption because their income is below 100%, you need to answer yes here. If they are trying to see if they qualify for a subsidy and if you believe them to be eligible for a subsidy, your answer should be yes here. The one exception would be a consumer who is looking to get a full price plan, either because their income is above 400% or because they offer affordable coverage. And you've already shown them the full costs of plans using the calculator, and they've agreed that they would like to sign up for one of those plans. So that would be the only time to answer no to this question. But if you're working with a consumer in that capacity, you would want to answer no, because it will enable you to skip the income section, which is quite a lot shorter. You'll get several questions in a row here that you need to answer according to the consumer situation. So, do you currently live in Texas? The answer should be yes. We should not be assisting people outside of Texas. Do you plan to file a federal income tax return for 2016? That should say 2018. I apologize. Again, they must file taxes in order to qualify for a subsidy. The next question will ask whether they're a U.S. citizen. You need to answer according to whether or not they are, of course. Can you enter a social security number? If the first and last names match, you're good to answer yes. Are you applying under a name that's different than the one on your social security card? Were you born outside the United States and became a naturalized or derived citizen? Are you currently incarcerated, American Indian or Alaskan Native? That would mean that they have actual tribal status. It can't just be that they heard that they might have, some Cherokee in them or something. They have to actually have that status to answer yes there. Are you responsible for a child 18 or younger who lives with you but isn't on your tax return? And then finally, the most confusing question, are you offered health coverage through your job, someone else's job, or COBRA? I would say for our purposes, the answer to this question should always be no. And the reason for that is that if you have assessed that the consumer's offer of coverage is not adequate or not affordable, you want to answer no here, because otherwise the application will vet them again. If they are offered COBRA, they are allowed to drop COBRA during open enrollment and sign up for a marketplace plan with subsidies. So if the answer is yes, just with COBRA, the answer here should be no. So this is very important. You have earlier indicated that they're not eligible for subsidies when you know that an offer makes them ineligible for subsidies. So for the most part, for offers that do not kick this person out of eligibility for subsidies, the answer to this question should pretty much always be no. All right, so I'm going to show you the short version of the application, which is for simple households and so individuals who are citizens or have regular tax households, meaning no adult dependents. If that is not the case for the household, the consumer will automatically get kicked to the long version of the application. It takes more time, but the questions and the process is very, very similar, and you will get occasion to look at both of those.